The term Great War is today most commonly known in its relation to the First World War. However, at one point, the term would have been better known in relation to the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. Up until the end of the First World War, the period of conflict from 1792 to 1815 were sometimes referred to as the Great French War or Great War. How great a war it was, however, is hard to determine. Less people died than in both World War I or in the much earlier 30 Years' War, and trying to determine the exact number of deaths is basically impossible. There are numerous different estimates circulating out there. Even more frustrating is the lack of a more comprehensive breakdown of casualties as to which nation they belong to. Luckily for everyone watching this video, I've spent a significant amount of time compiling some of the various estimates into a more comprehensive list. Disclaimer, however, that while the numbers presented are as accurate as I could obtain with the sources available to me, the nature of the topic means that just about any number could be disputed. Now, before getting on to the more deadly wars of the Napoleonic era, it's worth looking at where everything began with the French Revolution. The Revolution is certainly a complex beast, but as far as how many died during its turmoil, it's hard to say. Roughly 29,000 to 58,000 were executed with or without trial, mostly during the Reign of Terror. For the purposes of the video, the average of each range of deaths will be used. In this case, the average for the number executed comes out at 43,500. A further 10,000 to 11,000 also died in prison due to disease, malnourishment, or other causes. The bulk of deaths during the Revolution did not come from executions. Despite how popular images such as the guillotine have become, most deaths came from the suppression of internal rebellion, such as the largest that erupted in the Vendée. Estimates for the Vendée range wildly, with numbers being given as low as 80,000 and as high as 600,000. While the Vendée might have been the bloodiest internal conflict, it was not the only one, with other estimates for the overall deaths due to internal civil wars coming to somewhere between 263,000 and 500,000. Altogether, for the revolution itself, we come to a total rough average of 435,500 dead. Though the revolution itself was certainly deadly, the revolutionary wars that came about as a result dwarf it in size. The total dead during the period of 1792 to 1801 falls somewhere between 663,000 and 1,534,000 dead, with the average resting at 1,098,500. Unfortunately, the numbers here are a bit more iffy than both the previous numbers from the revolution itself and the Napoleonic Wars that we'll look at next. The main reason behind this is how people separate deaths. Some include deaths from the Vendée, for instance, into the numbers for the wider conflict. As a result, a more comprehensive breakdown of the dead is hard to achieve. What we can say, however, is that France by far lost the most people, followed by Austria and Russia. England and Prussia likely trail way behind them in terms of casualties, with a number of other nations losing various amounts of soldiers or civilians as a result of the conflicts. With the revolution itself and the wars that resulted from it now covered, we can move on to the origin for the majority of deaths during this time period, the Napoleonic Wars. France naturally took the most casualties during the course of the Napoleonic Wars. In terms of dead, estimates can range anywhere from 400,000 to 1.8 million. A good middle ground coming out as 1.1 million dead French military personnel. An important factor to note is that France's actual borders expanded massively as Napoleon's empire dominated Europe. With that new land came new sources of men for his armies. Many regiments had members with mixed origins, languages, and nationalities, so not every French regiment or even smaller groups of soldiers were necessarily 100% French. Though the estimates likely take this into account, it muddies the waters even further as to how many Frenchmen actually died. In second place on this very morbid sort of ranking list is the Austrian Empire. As the most consistent enemy of France throughout this period of turmoil in Europe, Austria suffered heavy losses. Estimates range from 300,000 to 1,128,000, with the average of the two numbers being 714,000 dead. While Austria suffered devastating defeat after devastating defeat at the hands of France, its willingness to repeatedly challenge the French kept it in a near constant state of war or recovering from war for over 28 years. Having lost the most, Austria also had the most to regain in regards to seeing France eventually be defeated. Russia may not have fought France as consistently as Austria, but France's invasion of Russia itself in 1812 makes up a good deal of the difference. The intensity of fighting and the losses both sides suffered in the later half of the Napoleonic Wars means that Russian dead number very similar to that of Austria. Estimates can range from roughly 450,000 to 867,000. Due to the tighter range, the average for Russian dead come out as 658,500, only about 50,000 less than Austria. The narrower time frame that Russia fought against France, along with a large chunk of the dead coming from the 1812 invasion, is likely the main cause behind the narrower range of Russian dead, and why it's so similar to the number of Austrian losses. Spain's total number of dead is of course difficult to estimate due to the guerrilla nature of the conflict on the peninsula. It is, however, somewhat smaller than one might think, with estimates ranging from 300,000 to 586,000, with the average sitting at 443,000 dead. The main reason behind why Spain's number of dead is as small as it is the heavy amount of fighting conducted by the British and Portuguese against the French. Without their aid, the Spanish guerrilla war might have lasted much longer, with many more dead on both sides. Prussia fought France and its allies less than most other great powers in Europe, but when both sides did clash, the conflicts would still be extremely deadly. Estimates range from 200,000 to 402,000 dead. The middle of those two numbers comes out as 351,000. Not the most dead, but still a significant amount considering that Prussia's population was only 6.1 million in 1789 and would only grow to 10.1 million in 1815 when Prussia's new borders settled. Prussia would be one of the biggest winners of the Napoleonic period, as it was set in a position that would allow it to eventually form a unified Germany. The final of the great powers that fought France is the British. They fought mostly in Portugal and Spain, but also fought France in numerous other places, both at sea and on land. Interestingly, the British appear to have kept much better records on the number of dead, leading to a much narrower range of potential total deaths. Based on the numbers I managed to find, total British dead lay somewhere between 243,000 and 311,000, with the average being 277,000. An interesting thing to note is that this number includes a more significant number of dead naval personnel than all other nations except possibly France itself, due to its role as the main naval opponent to the French. While more fighting took place in Spain than Portugal during the Peninsular War, a significant number of Portuguese still died during the conflict. Unfortunately, more attention seems to have been paid to the Spanish and British casualties, not the Portuguese. What estimates there are range from 200,000 to 250,000, with an average coming out at 225,000 dead. Certainly more than I thought there would be. Considering that Portugal's population in 1789 was only 2.7 million and would only reach 2.9 million by the end of the Napoleonic Wars, it's clear that Portugal was hit hard by the conflict. The Italians are an interesting group, as many of the Italian states fought against France during the Revolutionary Wars. During Napoleon's rule, however, a large chunk of Italy became directly controlled by France, with the rest being under the control of French client states, or allies. Similar to the Portuguese, there is a general lack of estimates on how many Italians died during the period, but the two estimates I could find list Italian dead somewhere between 100,000 and 120,000, respectively. So for our purposes, we'll mark the total Italian dead down at 110,000. The number could be higher, but with no firm estimates or numbers elsewhere, there's really no way to say for certain. Now we come to a part of the video where the numbers become a bit sketchier. When it comes to the Polish, very few numbers exist for their total dead, and what numbers do exist are often amalgamations for multiple groups, such as combining Italian and Polish dead into one number. So the number that I'm going with is a mix between other estimates and my own personal judgment. Considering the extent of Polish fighting from Spain to their own fight against Austria in 1809, culminating with the invasion of Russia in 1812 and the collapse of French influence with the Battle of Leipzig, I'm putting Polish dead somewhere between 100 to 150,000. We'll take the average 125,000, but it's important to keep in mind that this number is somewhat rougher than the rest. The final group that shall be covered is those dead from the various German states that fought mostly for France, primarily through the Confederation of the Rhine. Now, if the numbers for the Polish are sparse, then any estimates for the German dead in service for France are practically non-existent. I have no idea why they're so overlooked, but it does seem to be a trend that not as much attention is given to French allies in general when it comes to calculating the dead. Large number of German troops fought in Spain in 1809 and Russia, likely in even greater numbers than the Polish. Without any firm numbers or particularly decent references to create an estimate, I'm going to put the German dead at somewhere between 100 to 200,000. That'll give us an average of 150,000 dead, probably more off the mark than the rest of the numbers present, but it works fine for our purposes.
Te souviens-tu, disait un capitaine, au vétéran qui mendiait son pain. Te souviens-tu qu'autrefois dans la plaine, tu détournas un sabre de mon sein.
Estimates for total military dead during the Napoleonic Wars vary, from roughly 3 million to 6.5 million. Civilian dead ranges more wildly, but could be anywhere between 750,000 to 3 million dead. But where do my numbers fit into things? When adding up all the different numbers, we come to a total of 4,153,500 dead, not counting civilians. My number does fall into the possible ranges, but it's somewhat on the lower end of things, in part because of what was not included. Sweden and the Ottoman Empire, for instance, are not included in the numbers, mainly due to the difficulty in finding any information related to how many died in connection to the Napoleonic Wars. But if you added these nations along with others I'm sure I've missed, the number might be slightly higher and more in line with the average of the 3 million to 6.5 million number. Behind each of these numbers are thousands of names, ambitions, and beliefs. For every person killed, many more were wounded or fell sick, but recovered and returned to fighting. These people who for one reason or another found themselves fighting in one of the most turbulent periods of history deserve more than being reduced to mere numbers. But sometimes that's all we can do to try to understand the sheer scale of a conflict. Thank you all for watching, and if you want to learn more about this period of history, check out some of the other videos on the channel. Have a good day.